I'd always believed that a marriage breaks in silence, in the spaces between words, in the quiet dinners and the glances we no longer share. But now that I look back, I can pinpoint the precise moment when the first crack appeared, a hairline fracture in what I thought was an unshakable bond. It was a Tuesday evening when I came home earlier than usual. I remember, because the sky was still streaked with that lavender dusk light, and the air smelled like rain that hadn't yet fallen. I parked my black sedan at the curb, feeling an odd reluctance to step into the house. Maybe it was just fatigue, another 14-hour day at the firm, or maybe it was something deeper, a sense that I no longer knew what I was coming home to. I'm Ethan Carter, 34, corporate lawyer, husband of 7 years. Most people would call me driven. Some would call me obsessed. Samantha used to joke that if ambition were a disease, I'd be terminal. She used to laugh when she said it, her dark hair falling over her cheek, her hand covering mine. Now, the memory of her laughter feels like a story I once read and forgot. I carried my briefcase up the front steps. The porch light was off, which struck me as strange. Sam always turned it on before dusk. As I reached for the door, I felt the first stirrings of unease. It was nothing tangible, just a hush that pressed against my ears like cotton. The house felt expectant, as though holding its breath. Inside, everything looked ordinary. The kitchen counter was spotless. Her favorite mug sat in the sink, a faint ring of coffee at the bottom. The living room lamp glowed softly, casting shadows on the framed photographs, Samantha's graduation, our wedding in Napa, a trip to New York. I stared at those pictures a beat too long, studying our smiles. Were they real? Had they ever been? I called out her name. No answer. The hush grew heavier, settling over my shoulders like a damp blanket. I set my briefcase down and loosened my tie, trying to shake off the sense that something was off. I told myself it was nothing. She was probably upstairs, maybe napping or reading. But a prickling at the back of my neck wouldn't go away. As I climbed the stairs, I heard it, a muffled noise. A thud. A quick intake of breath. I stopped on the landing, every nerve in my body sparking to life. I waited, listening, but the sound didn't come again. My heartbeat sounded loud in my ears. I shook my head, trying to dismiss it. I was being paranoid. It had been a long day, and my imagination was filling the quiet with ghosts. But still, I walked down the hallway slowly, pausing outside the master bedroom. The door was closed. Samantha almost never closed it. I stood there for a long moment, my hand on the doorknob, telling myself I was being ridiculous. But something made me pull my hand away and step back. A voice in my head whispered, "Leave it alone. You don't want to know." I forced a laugh, trying to break the tension. "Sam?" My voice came out then. I waited, but no reply came. A floorboard creaked on the other side of the door. I swallowed hard. Every instinct screamed that I should fling the door open, demand an explanation, expose whatever secret was lurking behind it. But I didn't. I walked back downstairs instead, my pulse hammering, and pretended nothing had happened. I sat in the kitchen, staring at the cold cup of coffee in her mug. The house felt stranger than it ever had. I tried to rationalize. Maybe she was just changing clothes. Maybe she had a headache and didn't want to be disturbed. I repeated these excuses over and over until they sounded almost convincing. But the truth was I knew something had shifted. I just didn't understand what. That night, when she finally came down, she acted as though nothing was amiss. She kissed me lightly on the cheek, her lips cool against my skin. Her eyes didn't meet mine. "Long day?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral. "Yeah, I lied." "You?" "Same old," she said, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. We ate dinner in near silence. I told her about a case I was working on. She nodded at all the right moments, but her gaze kept drifting to the window, as though she expected someone to appear in the darkness. When I went to bed, she stayed downstairs, claiming she had emails to catch up on. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying that muffled noise, that closed door, the way she wouldn't look at me. Sometime after midnight, I heard her come to bed. She slipped under the covers without a word. I pretended to be asleep. Her breathing was slow and even, but I could feel the tension radiating off her in waves. I lay there for hours, thinking about all the years we'd spent together, how we'd built a life I thought was solid. But as the darkness stretched on, I realized that something had cracked, and no amount of pretending would seal it back up. Just before I finally drifted into a restless sleep, I thought I heard her whisper something under her breath. I couldn't make out the words, but I knew, deep in my bones, that I wasn't imagining things. I couldn't shake the feeling. Even after that strange moment in the hallway, her hand jerking away from the phone like it had burned her, she'd smiled too fast, her voice too bright. I kept telling myself it was nothing, that I was being paranoid. But something in me had shifted. I'd spent years trusting her without question. Now, every glance and every silence felt loaded, like a puzzle I'd never noticed was missing pieces. The first clue came 2 days later. She was in the shower, and I passed by her dresser to grab the spare charger I'd left behind. Her phone screen lit up as I walked past, a preview of a message she must have forgotten to hide. Just tell him you're working late again. He'll never know. No name. No context. Just that sentence, vague, poisonous. I stared at it, my heart hammering so loudly I thought she might hear it over the running water. Every logical part of me said to put the phone down, pretend I'd seen nothing. But curiosity is a slippery thing. Once it sinks its claws into you, it doesn't let go. I unlocked the screen. My hands were trembling. I scrolled up, desperate to find out who she was texting. The name was saved as A. Nothing more. A letter, as if that could erase the intimacy of the words that came before it. I keep thinking he'll notice. You worry too much. He trusts you. The walls of the room seemed to tilt. I felt sick, but I couldn't stop. 100 questions unspooled in my mind. Who was A? How long had this been going on? What exactly did she think I'd never find out? I locked the phone and set it back exactly where I'd found it. When she emerged minutes later, towel around her shoulders, she flashed that same bright smile, the one I'd always loved. But now it looked like a mask. Later that night, I tried to act normal. We ordered takeout, watched the same shows we always did. But I could feel myself studying her face when she laughed, dissecting every inflection of her voice. I kept looking for the tell, the moment she'd slip and reveal what she was hiding. Instead, she just leaned against me on the couch and threaded her fingers through mine. Maybe you're imagining it. The thought drifted in unbidden. Maybe you're so afraid of losing her that you're seeing shadows where there are none. But then she excused herself to take a call from work and shut herself in the bedroom. I heard her voice through the door, low and urgent in a way it had never been when she talked to her colleagues. I pressed my ear against the wood, straining to catch every word. I can't keep doing this. It's getting harder to lie to him. Her voice cracked then, and I felt something break inside me. This wasn't paranoia. This was real. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured her with someone else, whispering the same reassurances she used to give me, making the same promises. In the morning, I watched her from across the kitchen table as she sipped her coffee. I searched her face for any trace of guilt. When our eyes met, she smiled, and for a moment I almost believed it was all in my head. But then her phone buzzed on the counter again. She reached for it faster than I'd ever seen her move, glancing at me as though to see if I'd noticed.
I did.
I decided to test her. Hey, I said casually as I buttered a slice of toast. You said you might be working late again tonight? She hesitated, just for a second, but that was all it took. Yeah. Big project deadline. Which one? The Turner account, she said too quickly, her voice brittle. We both knew she hadn't worked on that account in over a year. A cold, brittle certainty settled in my chest. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I went through the motions at work, barely hearing what anyone said. Every memory replayed itself, moments that had seemed innocent now refracted through this ugly new lens. The business trips. The sudden changes in her schedule. The nights she came home too exhausted to talk. Were they all lies? When I got home, she was already dressed to go out, hair done, makeup perfect. "I might be late," she called over her shoulder as she grabbed her purse. I stood there in the doorway, watching her. Part of me wanted to grab her, to demand the truth, to make her say it to my face. But I couldn't. Not yet. Because if she admitted it, everything we had would shatter. And some desperate, pathetic part of me still hoped I was wrong. As the door closed behind her, I made a decision. I was done pretending. If she thought I'd never find out, she was about to learn how wrong she was. I had rehearsed this moment in my mind so many times that when it finally came, it felt almost anticlimactic. Like an old film reel unspooling in slow motion, each frame bleeding into the next until all I could see was the blur of my own dread. That night, I came home earlier than I ever had. I told her I'd be working late again, another lie to add to the pile between us. But I couldn't shake the gnawing certainty in my chest, that cold intuition that there was something happening right under my nose. The hallways smelled different, warmer, almost perfumed, as if someone had been here too long. The air had that weight it gets after two people have been talking in low voices for hours. I held my breath as I stepped across the threshold, waiting for some small sound. A cough, a hushed laugh, but the apartment was eerily silent. I thought, maybe I'm being paranoid again. Maybe the insomnia and the late nights were finally turning my brain against itself. But then I heard it, a soft shuffle from the bedroom, like someone had tried to move quickly and failed. My pulse thundered in my throat. I set my keys down with a click so deliberate it felt theatrical, like I was announcing my arrival to an audience I couldn't see. I called her name, once, then again, and my voice cracked the way it always did when I was afraid of the answer. No reply, just that silence, stretching itself around me until it felt almost compassionate, like the house was trying to prepare me for what came next. I walked down the hallway. I noticed every detail in painful clarity, the half-empty glass of wine on the hall table, the shirt draped over the back of a chair, the faint impression of a second body on the couch. Things I'd overlooked 1,000 times before, but that now gleamed with significance. I reached the bedroom door. My hand hovered over the knob. I remember thinking that maybe if I waited just one more second, this moment wouldn't have to exist yet. Maybe if I didn't open the door, I could still pretend ignorance was an option. But that's the curse of suspicion. Once you start to wonder, you can never unknow. I pushed the door open. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, her back to me. She didn't flinch when I came in. That struck me as more damning than any confession could have been. She'd expected this. She'd stopped caring whether I found out. He was standing by the window, buttoning his shirt. I didn't know his name. Didn't need to. He was just another man who'd been made complicit in my humiliation. No one spoke. It was the strangest thing. How quickly the air shifted from clandestine to mundane. The way they stood there, not even bothering to look ashamed. I felt like a ghost in my own life, like I'd stumbled onto a scene that had been rehearsed for weeks before I ever thought to suspect. My voice came out hoarse. "How long?" She turned her head a fraction. Her eyes were dark, glassy with something that might have been regret, or just exhaustion. "A while," she said. That was all. No explanation. No apology. Just a sentence so pitiless in its brevity that it felt like a slap. I thought I'd feel rage. That was what I'd prepared for, righteous fury that would propel me out of that room, out of her orbit, into some cleaner future. But instead, all I felt was a cold, hollow curiosity, as if I were studying the collapse of a stranger's life instead of my own. He cleared his throat. "I should go." Neither of us answered him. He slipped past me, avoiding eye contact, and I realized he smelled like my cologne. I wondered if she'd kept it on purpose, or if it was just one more thing I'd lent to this silent betrayal. When he was gone, I sat down in the chair by the dresser. My legs wouldn't hold me up any longer. She didn't move, just stared at the floor like she was calculating how much longer she'd have to sit there before it was polite to get up and leave me alone. "You could have told me," I whispered. Her shoulders lifted in a tiny shrug. "I didn't want to hurt you." I laughed, sharp, ugly. "You didn't want to hurt me? You've been lying for months." Her mouth tightened. And you've been lying to yourself. You knew something was wrong. You just didn't want to see it. I opened my mouth to deny it, but the truth was she was right. I had known. Every late night, every distant kiss, every moment she looked past me like I was already gone. I'd known. I just hoped that if I pretended hard enough, it wouldn't be real. The worst part wasn't that she'd betrayed me. It was that I'd let her. She finally looked up. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears, but I couldn't tell if they were for me or for the fact that we'd finally said it all out loud. "I'm sorry," she murmured. I stared at her, at the woman I'd loved or thought I loved, and wondered if I'd ever really known her. If I'd ever really known myself. Outside, a car engine rumbled to life. Him, escaping into the night while we stayed here, trapped in the wreckage. I stood. My hands were trembling, and I clenched them into fists to keep from showing it. "I don't care," I lied. "I don't care anymore." She flinched as though I'd struck her. For a moment, I almost believed it myself, that I didn't care. That the ache in my chest was just a phantom limb of an old love that had died long before tonight. But as I turned away, I knew I'd never stop caring. Not really. Not about her, or about the part of me that she'd taken when she decided I wasn't enough. I walked down the hallway in a daze, the shadows swallowing me one by one. Behind me, the door clicked shut. And that was when I knew nothing in my life would ever be the same again. The moment I'd been dreading and craving in some twisted corner of my mind finally arrived. I stood outside the doorway, my hand hovering over the knob, the echo of my own pulse deafening in my ears. On the other side of the wall, their voices were hushed and uneven, soaked in the kind of intimacy I'd been too blind to notice. I don't know what finally broke me, whether it was the months of suspicion or the raw betrayal that tasted metallic on my tongue. But something inside me snapped. I pushed the door open. The room went silent in an instant. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, her hair falling like a dark curtain around her face. He was standing too close, frozen mid-sentence. For one surreal second, no one moved. We just stared at each other, as if we were all actors trapped in a scene we didn't remember rehearsing. "What is this?" My voice came out low, almost detached. It didn't even sound like me. She looked up slowly, her mouth parting, searching for a lie that wouldn't sound ridiculous. He swallowed, his eyes darting toward the window as if he was calculating whether he could bolt before I stepped further inside. I waited, arms crossed, daring them to answer. Her face crumpled first. "It's not what you think." "Then what is it?" I stepped closer, every movement deliberate, measured. I wanted them to feel how calm I was. I wanted them to feel how close they were to seeing the absolute worst in me. He cleared his throat. "We were just talking." "Talking?" I echoed, my gaze flicking to the rumpled sheets, the flush in her cheeks, the way she couldn't meet my eyes. "Sure. You always talk in locked bedrooms." I felt a surge of something ugly, something that had been building every time I replayed the half-finished conversations, the secret looks, the excuses. She stood, taking a step toward me. "I never meant for you to find out this way." I laughed then, a short, humorless bark that made her flinch. "No. You never meant for me to find out at all." "Please," she whispered, her voice cracking. "It just happened." "How long?" My question sliced through the air, sharper than any accusation. Neither of them answered. The silence was confirmation enough. Every memory of the past year began to fracture, splitting along hairline cracks I hadn't noticed before. The vacations she said she was too busy to take. The nights he came home late. The birthdays where they found reasons not to show up. "You lied to me," I said, more to myself than to them. "You looked me in the eyes and told me I was paranoid." She covered her face with her hands. He finally spoke, voice low and shaky. "We didn't want to hurt you." "Didn't want to hurt me?" I repeated, incredulous. "You think this?" I gestured between them, my hand trembling. "You think this is better?" A horrible, thick quiet settled over the room. I felt the walls tilt around me. Then she did the one thing I never expected. She reached for me. I jerked back, so violently my shoulder hit the doorframe. "Don't," I warned, my voice a ragged whisper. Don't touch me. Her arm dropped to her side. I saw the moment she realized there was nothing left she could say. I looked at him, this man who had promised loyalty, who had told me I was imagining things when I asked if something was wrong. You, I said quietly, are exactly who I thought you were. And her. She wasn't even worth the word friend anymore. For one long moment, no one spoke. The three of us stood there, the wreckage of what we'd been clinging to settling into something final and irreparable. Then, with a steadiness I didn't feel, I turned away from them. Just before I crossed the threshold, I heard her voice, thin and breaking. Please don't leave like this. I paused, my hand on the door. I didn't look back. When you decided to lie, I said, you gave up the right to ask me for anything. I stepped into the hall, shutting the door behind me. And for the first time in months, I felt something close to relief. I wish I could tell you that the confrontation settled everything. That after the door slammed, all the questions I'd carried finally quieted. But the truth is, when the dust cleared, a more unsettling silence took hold of my life. I didn't go back to my apartment right away. Instead, I drove aimlessly through the neon-soaked streets, the city blurring in my peripheral vision like a time-lapse of every place I'd ever been unwanted. My hands were trembling so badly I had to pull over and just sit there, forehead pressed to the steering wheel, my breath ragged. Every image replayed in a slow, nauseating loop, her face, wide-eyed and pale, his mouth still hanging open, as if they hadn't expected the door to swing open no matter how loud they'd whispered behind it. How long had it been happening? How many times did I walk right past them? I tried to summon anger that would burn away the shame, but it only flickered, weak and inconsistent. Because more than rage, I felt hollow, like the part of me that trusted anything had been scooped out with a dull spoon. When I finally made it home, the place felt foreign. The framed photos on the shelf, smiling faces, arms around each other, might as well have belonged to strangers. I set my keys down and just stood there, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, feeling the weight of the secret pressing on my shoulders. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them. The hush of their voices. The frantic scramble to pull apart. Her hand frozen mid-gesture. His shirt half-buttoned. By morning, I realized there was no going back to before. No matter how many excuses she stammered or how many apologies he texted. The next few days were a blur. She tried to call. She left voicemails that started calm and ended in breathless panic. Please, can we talk? It wasn't what it looked like. But it was. It was exactly what it looked like. I didn't answer. I didn't trust my voice not to crack in a way that would embarrass me more than she already had. Instead, I started replaying every moment that led up to that night. The missed calls. The sudden change in her schedule. The way she'd smiled absently when I told her I loved her. It felt like a sickness in my chest. A raw ache I couldn't cough up. The world kept turning anyway. I went to work. I smiled when people said good morning. I signed for packages. All while this ugly truth festered in my ribs, unseen by everyone around me. And when I finally did pick up the phone, it wasn't because I forgave her. It was because I needed her to know she hadn't destroyed me the way she'd probably hoped. Her voice was small when she answered. I didn't think you'd call. I know, I said evenly. That's what makes this easier. There was a pause so heavy it felt like the line might go dead under its weight. I don't expect you to understand, she whispered. We never meant. Don't finish that sentence. I cut in, my tone sharper than I'd ever heard it. You meant exactly what you did. You just didn't think I'd walk in and see it. She started to say something else, maybe another excuse, maybe another lie, but I hung up before she could finish. I stood there staring at my phone, feeling both disgusted and relieved. It should have ended there. It almost did. But a week later, I got an envelope slid under my door. No return address. Just my name written in a handwriting I recognized instantly. For a moment, I thought about throwing it away unopened. But curiosity has always been my downfall. I tore it open with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. Inside was a single photograph. Grainy, black and white. Clearly taken through a window. It was me, sitting at my desk, staring at my laptop. Completely unaware. On the back, in the same handwriting, were 5 words that made my heart stop. You were never alone here. I read it once, then again, my throat tightening until I couldn't breathe. Suddenly, every late-night noise, every flicker of movement I dismissed as paranoia, none of it seemed harmless anymore. I dropped the photo on the counter and backed away as though it might burst into flame. My mind was a whirlwind. Who took it? How long had they been watching me? Was it her? Was it him? Or was it someone else entirely? I pressed a hand to my chest to feel my heartbeat, needing the proof that I was still real, still here, still in control of something. But I wasn't. I wasn't in control at all. And in that moment, I understood the most terrifying part of betrayal. It doesn't end when you walk in on them. It ends when you finally realize you never really knew them, or yourself at all.